The attorney's name was Ed Falk, and he was reading from a single sheet of paper in a small law office in Waynesburg, Pennsylvania. It was November. Grey light came through Venetian blinds and landed on a particle board conference table, where 4 adults sat on one side and Dorothy Purcell sat alone on the other. She was 71 years old. Her husband Harold had been dead for 31 days. The will was dated August 14, 2003. It was 1 page. It divided the tangible estate among 3 children in equal shares. The farmhouse, the John Deere 4440 tractor, the Kubota, side by side, the livestock trailer, and the contents of the joint savings account at First Federal, which held $214,000. To Dorothy, Harold's wife of 49 years, the will left 1 item. The barn structure and associated parcel, Lot 7B, Greene County, comprising approximately 4.7 acres. Karen did not laugh. She did something worse. She reached across the table and squeezed Dorothy's hand, the way you comfort someone who has received bad news they already expected. Dale looked at the table, Glenn looked at Ray, and Ray looked at the ceiling. And nobody said what everyone was thinking, that the barn was worth less than what it would cost to tear it down. Dorothy did not cry. She folded the 1-page copy Ed gave her and put it in her purse next to a grocery list she had written for a man who would never eat again. That barn sat a quarter-mile from the farmhouse. At the bottom of a slope the family called the Soak because it flooded every spring. It had been condemned by Greene County 18 months earlier. A red tag on the door, a letter Harold had never answered. There were $11,400 in back taxes on the parcel alone. The roof leaked in 4 places. The east wall leaned 9 inches off true. It was the kind of inheritance that costs you money, the kind of gift you have to pay to throw away. Nobody in that room, not Karen, not Dale, not Glenn, not Ray, and not the attorney who had known Harold for 30 years, understood what Harold Purcell had actually done, what he had buried, what he had built, in secret, over 20 years, underneath the one structure on the property that none of his children had set foot inside since the century turned. But to understand the barn, you have to understand the man who built it. And to understand what he left Dorothy, you have to understand what was taken from her first. Dorothy Purcell was born Dorothy Matejka in 1952, the second daughter of a coal miner in Nemacolin, Pennsylvania. She married Harold in June of 1974, 2 weeks after her 22nd birthday, and moved to the Purcell farm outside Jefferson in Greene County the same week. It rained on the wedding day and rained on the drive to the farm and rained every day for the next week. And Harold said that was the land telling her she had been accepted. She did not inherit the farm. She earned it. For 47 years, Dorothy Purcell kept the books for an operation that ran on margins so thin they barely existed. She tracked every bushel of feed corn, every gallon of diesel, every vet bill for every calf. She could read a county tax assessment the way other women read recipes, scanning for the number that mattered, catching the one that was wrong. When the farm nearly went under in 1991, it was Dorothy who found the error in the township's reassessment, drove to the county seat, and argued the case herself because they could not afford the attorney. She won. Harold told that story for 20 years afterward. Dorothy never mentioned it once. She raised 3 children in that farmhouse. She canned tomatoes from the kitchen garden, drove the grain truck when Harold's back seized, taught Sunday school at the Bethel AME Church for 19 years, and sat beside Harold for the last 14 months of his illness, sleeping in a recliner next to the oxygen concentrator because she was afraid that if she went upstairs she would not hear him stop breathing. The farmhouse was a 4-bedroom clapboard built in 1948 by Harold's father. Nothing grand. But the porch faced west, and every summer evening for nearly 50 years, Dorothy and Harold had sat on that porch and watched the light go amber over the lower pasture. Neither of them said much, because there was nothing that needed saying. Harold died on a Tuesday in October of 2023. The oxygen concentrator was still humming when the hospice nurse turned it off. Dorothy sat in the recliner for another hour before she called anyone. Karen arrived first, from Pittsburgh, 90 minutes away. She brought Ray. They went through the house that first evening, not searching exactly, but opening drawers, looking at shelves, touching things with the tips of their fingers the way people do when they are already calculating. Dorothy saw it, but said nothing. Her husband was not yet cold. The will was located 3 days later. Ray found it in the filing cabinet in Harold's office, a room in the back of the farmhouse that had been Harold's alone, where he kept his ledgers and his father's rifles and a small oak desk he had built himself. Dorothy had not entered that room since Harold died. Ray entered it the morning after the funeral. The will was 1 page. It divided the tangible property among the 3 children in equal shares. The farmhouse, the 310-acre parcel it sat on, the John Deere 4440, the Kubota, the livestock trailer, and the joint savings account. The only thing left to Dorothy was the barn and its 4.7 acres, Lot 7B, a separate lot Harold's father had subdivided in 1961. There was no mention of a trust, no codicil, no letter attached. What happened next took 17 days. Karen retained a probate attorney in Pittsburgh. Not Ed Falk, whom she called Dad's Guy, but a firm Ray knew through his equipment dealer network. Dale, who lived in Morgantown, did not hire his own attorney. He did not need to. He needed cash, and the will gave him a third of $214,000, enough to cover what he owed. Glenn, the youngest, lived in North Carolina and had not visited the farm in 6 years. He signed every document Ray put in front of him, by DocuSign without reading any of them. The probate was rushed. Dorothy was told by Karen and not by an attorney that the farmhouse, the equipment, and the bank account were the kids' share, Mom, the way Dad wanted it. That she was welcome to stay in the farmhouse for now, until they decided what to do with it. That the barn was hers, if you even want it. Dorothy asked one question. Did any of you read the whole will? Karen said. Mom, it's 1 page. Dorothy did not ask again. Within 3 weeks, the savings account had been divided. Within 5, the John Deere 4440 was on Ray's lot in Canonsburg, listed for $38,500. Within 7, Karen informed Dorothy that they had accepted an offer on the farmhouse, $285,000, and that she would need to be out by January 15th. Dorothy Purcell, who had lived in that house for 49 years, who had paid its mortgage with Harold for 30 of those years, who had nursed her husband through his last 400 days in the back bedroom on the first floor, was given 60 days to leave. She had $340 in her personal checking account. Harold had always managed the savings. She had never thought to question it. She packed what she could fit in the bed of Harold's 2004 Chevrolet Silverado, the one vehicle not listed in the will, because it had been titled solely in her name. She took her clothes, the kitchen Bible, a box of photographs, and the grocery list from her purse. The barn was a quarter-mile down the Soak, at the end of a mud track that had not been gravelled since 2011. It was a timber frame structure Harold's father, Edwin Purcell, had built in 1962. 61 years old, never updated, never insulated, never loved by anyone except the man who had spent more time inside it than anyone knew. Dorothy drove down to it on the morning Karen told her about the farmhouse sale. She parked the Silverado in the frozen mud and sat in the cab for a long time. She had not been inside the barn in over 2 years. Harold had told her toward the end that he had closed it up because the county had condemned it and there was no money to fix the roof. She had accepted that. She had been too tired 14 months of round-the-clock caregiving to question it. Now she looked at it. The red paint had gone to grey. The east wall leaned like a man turning away from the wind. There was a red tag on the main door, condemned do not enter Greene County Code enforcement, dated March 2022. The back taxes, she would learn, were $11,400. The cost to demolish and clear the lot, according to a county estimate Harold had received and filed, was $22,000, Karen had said. At the law office, you could probably just let the county take it, Mum. Save yourself the headache. Dale had said nothing. Glenn had already signed off. Nobody wanted the barn. Nobody had wanted the barn for as long as Dorothy could remember. It was the punchline of the estate, the one thing left over after everything real had been divided. Dorothy could have signed it over to the county. She could have walked away, moved in with her sister in Uniontown, and never thought about Lot 7B again. Any reasonable person would have. But Dorothy Purcell had spent 47 years finishing things other people walked away from. She had sat beside a dying man for 14 months because she had promised him, in a church, in 1974, that she would. She was not the kind of woman who left a thing unfinished, even a thing nobody wanted. She got out of the truck. She walked to the barn door. She pulled the condemned notice off the nail, folded it, and put it in her coat pocket. Then she went inside. The smell was the first thing. Wet wood, old hay, diesel that had seeped into the poured concrete floor decades ago and never left. Cold, deep November cold, the kind that lives in stone and does not leave until May. The light came through the 4 places the roof had failed, slanting down in pale columns that caught the dust Dorothy's boots kicked up. The main space was 40 feet by 60. A hayloft ran the length of the east side, but the ladder was gone and the loft floor sagged in the middle, bowed like the spine of an old book. Below it, a row of cattle stanchions that had not held an animal since 2009. Along the west wall, Harold's workbench, 8 feet of oak, scarred and oil-darkened, with a machinist's vise bolted to one end and a pegboard above it, where the shapes of missing tools were outlined in pencil, the way Harold had always kept them. Half the tools were gone. Ray had taken them after the funeral, Dorothy realized. Not through the will, just by carrying them to his truck. Nobody had said anything. Nobody had been counting. Behind the workbench, a grain room, a partitioned space, maybe 10 by 12, with a plywood door held shut by a barrel boat. Dorothy opened it. Inside, 23 bags of cracked corn stacked against the wall. A hand-crank seed spreader with a rusted hopper, and a shelf of old ledgers, the feed purchase records Harold had kept going back to 1985, separate from the household books Dorothy managed. She had never kept these particular ledgers. They were Harold's domain. Feed, seed, veterinary supply, diesel. She had handled the mortgage, the taxes, the insurance, the household. They had divided the books the way they divided the labor, without discussion, completely. Captain, the border collie mix, 13 years old, grey around the muzzle. One clouded eye had followed her from the truck. He stood at the barn's threshold and would not come inside until Dorothy called him twice. Then he walked to the workbench, lay down beneath it the way he had always lain at Harold's feet, and set his chin on the concrete floor. Dorothy looked at the barn, the sagging loft, the leaning wall, the dripping roof, the absent tools, the cold, and thought, this is what I have. This is all I have. The county's condemnation report, which she would retrieve from the township office 2 days later, listed 3 structural deficiencies. The east wall's lateral displacement at 9 inches off plumb, the hayloft floor's load failure, and evidence of foundation settling on the northeast corner. The estimated remediation cost was $74,000. The assessed value of the structure, not the land, was $6,200. The back taxes on Lot 7B $11,400. She did not have $11,400. She had $340. Dorothy did not go back to the grain room on her first visit. She spent that day walking the property, 4.7 acres of overgrown pasture, a seasonal creek, and a gravel pad where a second outbuilding had stood until it burned in 1998. She noted the fence line, the drainage, the state of the access road. She was, without thinking about it, doing what she had done for 47 years, surveying a problem, looking for the numbers. She came back the next morning, and the morning after that, she brought a space heater powered by the Silverado's inverter, a folding chair, and a thermos of coffee. Captain came with her each time. On the third morning, she pulled one of Harold's feed ledgers off the shelf in the grain room. It was the 1997 volume, a black-and-white composition notebook, college-ruled, Harold's handwriting in ballpoint, so consistent, it almost looked printed. She opened it to check feed costs against what she remembered from that year's household books. Between pages 41 and 42, the spine was thicker than it should have been. She fanned the pages. Something had been glued into the binding, carefully, with the precision Harold brought to everything, so that the notebook closed flat, and you would never know it was there unless you felt the weight or happened to spread those particular pages. It was a piece of paper, folded twice. Heavy stock, not notebook paper. The color was cream, aged to the tan of old piano keys. She unfolded it. It was a hand-drawn map. Surveyor's marks, bearings, distances in chains, a north arrow. The parcel shape was Lot 7B. Dorothy recognized it from the tax records. But this map showed something the county plat did not. A second boundary, drawn in red ink, below the surface boundary. It was labeled, in Harold's handwriting, Subsurface, see Deed Book 441, page 312. Dorothy had never seen this map. She had never heard Harold mention a subsurface boundary. She had never, in 47 years of keeping the household books, seen any deed recorded in Book 441. She turned the map over. On the back, in Harold's hand, smaller and more careful than his usual script, was a single line. Dot, the surface is what they see. What I saved for you is underneath. She held the paper for a long time. Captain shifted under the workbench. The bare bulb in the grain room swung on its cord, and the shadows moved across the bags of cracked corn. And Dorothy Purcell stood there with her dead husband's handwriting in her hands, and understood, for the first time, that the barn was not the end of the story. The Greene County Recorder of Deeds office is in the courthouse in Waynesburg, a 15-minute drive from the farm. Dorothy went the next morning. She left Captain in the Silverado with the window cracked and the heater running. She asked the clerk for Deed Book 441, page 312. The clerk, a young woman who had to look up how the old book system worked because most records had been digitized, brought her a heavy, leather-bound volume from the basement archive. Dorothy opened it at the counter. Page 312 was a mineral rights deed, dated September 22, 1994. It recorded the conveyance of subsurface mineral rights, specifically natural gas extraction rights, for a parcel described by meets and bounds that matched Lot 7B. The grantor was a name Dorothy did not recognize. Elmer Fyock, an elderly farmer whose land had once adjoined the Purcell property on the south. The grantee was Harold R. Purcell. Harold had bought the mineral rights to Lot 7B, the barn parcel, in 1994. 29 years ago, he had paid Elmer Fyock $1,200 for them, a sum noted in the deed. At the time, the mineral rights to Greene County farmland were nearly worthless. The Marcellus shale gas boom would not begin for another decade. Dorothy stood at the counter for a long time. The clerk asked if she was all right. "I'm fine," Dorothy said. "Could you check if there are any other mineral rights deeds recorded under the name Harold R. Purcell?" The clerk typed. The computer returned 6 results. 6 separate mineral rights deeds recorded between 1994 and 2012, covering subsurface rights on parcels totaling 310 acres, an area that, Dorothy realized with a slowness that felt like cold water rising, corresponded almost exactly to the full acreage of the Purcell farm. Harold had quietly purchased the mineral rights to the land under their entire farm. He had done it parcel by parcel, over 18 years beginning in 1994, when nobody thought Greene County gas rights were worth anything, and ending in 2012, 2 years after the Marcellus shale drilling had already made those same rights worth a fortune. But here was the part that made Dorothy reach for the counter's edge. The mineral rights were recorded under Harold's name alone. They had not been listed in the will. They had not been part of the probate. Karen's Pittsburgh attorney had inventoried the tangible estate, the farmhouse, the equipment, the bank account, and had never searched the mineral rights index. Nobody had. The rights existed in a separate legal universe from the property the children had taken, and the deed for the first and oldest set of rights, the one Dorothy was holding in her hands, was attached to Lot 7B, the barn parcel, the one thing they had left her. She asked the clerk to make copies of all 6 deeds. She paid $4.50 for the copies, nearly the cost of a gallon of gas to get home. Then she drove back to the barn, sat in the folding chair, opened the feed ledger to the hidden map, and read Harold's line again. Dot. The surface is what they see. What I saved for you is underneath. The rights existed. They were Harold's, separate from the probated estate. But Dorothy knew, because she knew how property worked, that owning rights and proving you inherited them were two very different things. The 6 deeds were in Harold's name. Harold was dead. The will did not mention them. If the children found out, they could file a supplementary probate petition and claim them. Dorothy said nothing to anyone. Back at the barn, she re-examined the survey map. In the grain room's bare bulb light, she had now paid the electric company $47 to restore power to the barn's meter, leaving her $288.50. She smoothed the map on the workbench. She realized something she had missed the first time. There were 2 layers of ink. The map itself, the parcel boundary, the bearings, the north arrow, was in black. The subsurface boundary was in red, but there was a third notation, in pencil, so faint she needed Harold's old magnifying glass, still in the workbench drawer, to read it. The magnifying glass was brass-rimmed, the lens scratched, Harold's thumbprint in dried oil on the handle. She held it close to the paper. In the lower right corner, a string of 6 digits, 091752. Below them, in pencil so light it could have been a shadow. The post. You'll know which one. Dorothy recognized the 6 digits immediately. Her birthday, September 17, 1952. Harold had used her birthday as a combination. A combination to what? And which post? The barn had 14 support posts. The map was not just a record. It was a set of instructions. Harold was leading her somewhere inside the barn. She decided to examine every post. She did this methodically, starting at the northeast corner and working clockwise, the same order Harold always used when he checked the stanchions. She was following his habits, because she knew him better than anyone alive. Captain lay under the workbench, chin on concrete, watching her with his one good eye. 13 posts were rough-hewn oak, untreated grey with age. The 14th, the center support post, the structural heart of the barn, was different. It was also oak, but it had been sanded smooth on one face, about chest height. When Dorothy ran her hand across it, she felt grooves, letters, words, carved into the wood with a chisel, then stained dark so they blended with the grain unless you were looking, unless you were touching. But before she read the carving carefully, something else caught her eye. At the base of this same post, the concrete floor had been poured differently. A 3-foot square section was slightly raised, maybe half an inch, and the color was a shade lighter. Newer. It had been poured years after the original foundation. She was not ready to break concrete, not yet. She followed the trail Harold had left, one rail at a time, in order. She went back to the workbench. Harold had spent more time at this workbench than anywhere else in the barn. If he was hiding things in sequence, he would have started here. She got on her knees. Captain shifted to give her room. Under the workbench, bolted to the frame with 4 carriage bolts, was a steel ammunition box. Olive drab. Stenciled. 3006 Springfield, 240 rounds. Military surplus, the kind you can buy at any Army-Navy store for $12. The bolts were tight. Harold used lock washers. It took Dorothy 20 minutes with a socket wrench to remove them. Her hands were cold. Her knees ached on the concrete. She was 71 years old and alone in a condemned barn, and she did not stop. The rust on the ammunition box's hinges cracked as she opened the lid. Inside, wrapped in a plastic bread bag, Stroman's, the same brand they had bought for 40 years, the logo still legible, she found 3 things. The first was a stack of 7 mineral rights lease certificates, agreements between Harold R. Purcell and Southwestern Energy Company, dated between 2010 and 2018. Each certificate granted Southwestern the right to extract natural gas from the subsurface parcels Harold owned. Each specified a royalty rate ranging from 15% to 18.75% of production revenue, payable to the rights holder. The second was a business card for an attorney named Martin Kovac in Uniontown, Pennsylvania. with a handwritten note on the back. He knows everything. Call him when you find this. The third was a handwritten note on a piece of feed store receipt paper, torn from a roll at Southern States Co-op, the address printed at the top. Harold's handwriting was steady, unhurried, the same hand that wrote feed ledgers for decades. It read, "These leases are active. The royalties have been deposited into the trust since 2010. I never told you about the trust, because I was afraid one of them would find out before I finished setting it up. I'm sorry for the secret, Dot. It was the only way I could make sure they couldn't take what I built for you." He had signed it with a single letter. H. Captain's tail thumped once on the concrete, when Dorothy said, "Oh, Harold," under her breath. The mineral rights were not dormant. They were leased. They were producing revenue. The revenue had been going into a trust. This was not a fortune waiting to be unlocked. It was a fortune already generating income. But what trust? Where was it? How much was in it? And was the trust legally structured so that the children could not claim it through supplementary probate? Dorothy knew enough about property law to know that an improperly structured trust could be challenged. It was a Sunday. She could not call Martin Kovac until Monday. She waited. She did not call anyone, not her sister, not her children, not the county. She went back to the barn the next morning, and the next. She was patient the way Harold was patient. She was finishing what he started. Monday morning she called Martin Kovac. He was 78 years old, semi-retired, and he had been waiting for this call for, he told her, longer than I'd like to admit. He told Dorothy 3 things. First, that Harold had contacted him in 2008. Second, that Harold had established an irrevocable trust in 2009. Third, that the trust's documentation, the original signed and notarized instrument, was not in Kovac's office. Harold had insisted on keeping the original himself. He said you'd find it when you were ready, Kovac told her. He said it was in the barn. Dorothy returned to the barn. Now she looked at the carved oak post, the center support, the one with the sanded face. The grooves she had felt but not yet read carefully. The carving, done with a fine chisel, stained dark, running vertically along the post's sanded face. It read, "I built this barn with my father in 1962. I was 10 years old, and I held the posts while he drove the bolts. This was the center post. He told me it was the one the whole barn leaned on. When I met you, I understood what he meant." Below the carved message, the initials HP, for DAP Harold Purcell, for Dorothy Ann Purcell. Below the carving, at the base of the post where the oak met the lighter-colored concrete, was a small brass plate, 2 inches square, inset flush with the wood, almost invisible unless you were kneeling. Green with patina, and recessed into the concrete at the very base of the post, hidden by decades of dust and a carefully placed chip of bark, was a combination dial. Not a padlock. A combination dial in the style of a small floor safe. Dorothy knelt. She dialed 091752. Her birthday. The dial turned. Something clicked beneath the concrete. She needed help. She could not break concrete alone. She called one person, the only person she trusted completely, her younger sister, June, in Uniontown. It was the first time in the entire ordeal she had asked anyone for help. She had done everything alone until now, and this decision, to let one other person into the story, was the decision that brought a human witness to what was coming. June drove from Uniontown the next day. She was 68, a retired school nurse, and she brought a pry bar, a hammer, and a casserole. Together, Dorothy and June removed the lighter-colored concrete panel. It was not structural. It was a separate cap, 3 inches thick, poured over a fireproof floor safe that Harold had set into the original foundation. The safe was a sentry safe, 1.2 cubic feet, fire-rated for 1 hour at 1700 degrees Fahrenheit. It was the kind of safe a man buys to protect the one thing that cannot be replaced. Its metal surface was cold and beaded with condensation. Dust and grit from the concrete coated their hands. Captain was standing now, alert, as if he recognized the sound of something important. Inside the safe, Dorothy found 2 envelopes. The first was a manila envelope, sealed, with "Dot" written on it in Harold's unmistakable capital letters. It was heavy. She could feel the weight of several pages inside. She held it. She did not open it. The second envelope was unsealed. It contained the original notarized trust document. The Dorothy A. Purcell Irrevocable Trust, established March 14, 2009, by Harold R. Purcell as grantor, with Martin Kovac as trustee and Dorothy A. Purcell as sole beneficiary. The trust held all mineral rights acquired by Harold R. Purcell between 1994 and 2012, 6 deeds, 310 subsurface acres, all associated lease agreements with Southwestern Energy Company, and all royalty income therefrom. The trust was irrevocable, meaning Harold could not have changed it, and neither could anyone else. It was not part of Harold's probate estate. It had never been subject to the will. It passed directly to Dorothy upon Harold's death, outside the probate process entirely, by the trust's own terms. On the last page of the trust document, in Harold's handwriting, dated March 14, 2009, was a handwritten addendum. I could have told you, Dot. I almost did, 100 times. But I knew what they would do when I was gone. I knew they would take what was easy, so I made sure that the hard thing, the thing only you would keep, was the one that mattered. The trust was crisp, notarized with a raised seal. June's hand rested on Dorothy's shoulder. The barn creaked in the wind, and the space heater ticked, and Dorothy held the sealed manila envelope in one hand, and the trust document in the other, and understood, fully for the first time, the shape of what Harold had built. The children had taken the farmhouse, the tractor, and the bank account, the tangible probated assets. They had left Dorothy the barn, and the barn sat on Lot 7B, the parcel whose subsurface rights were the first ones Harold had ever bought, the seed of everything. She sat in the folding chair. Captain lay at her feet. June stood behind her. Dorothy held the manila envelope with Dot on it and did not open it. She was not ready. She needed a moment. Dorothy Purcell spent 3 days in a condemned barn, following a trail her husband left her 20 years ago. She found it because she was the kind of person who finishes what she starts. If you are the kind of person who stays until the end of a story, and you have not yet subscribed, now would be a good time. What comes next is the part that nearly takes it all away. It took 8 days. 8 days from the morning Dorothy pulled the mineral rights deeds at the courthouse, to the evening Karen's Lexus pulled up the mud track to the barn. Dorothy was inside, running the space heater, reading the trust document for the 3rd time. Captain heard the car before she did, and stood up, growling low. Karen came alone. No Ray. That was the first sign that she knew something, because Karen never did anything without Ray's advice. And the fact that she had come without him meant she was doing something Ray did not yet know about, or something she did not want Ray to control. "Mom," Karen said from the doorway. She did not step inside. The doorframe still wore the nail holes where the condemned notice had been. "You've been going to the courthouse." Dorothy set the trust document on the workbench, face down. She did not hurry. She did not hide it. "I have." "What are you looking for?" Dorothy considered her eldest daughter. 49 years old, a real estate agent in the northern suburbs of Pittsburgh. Married to Ray for 23 years. A woman who had stopped visiting the farm regularly when she was 25 and had come back only for holidays and finally for the funeral. Karen was not cruel. That was the thing people got wrong about this story. Karen was frightened. She had watched her mother care for her dying father for over a year, and she had been terrified, not of the death but of the devotion, of what it cost, of the possibility that she might one day be expected to give that much. She had taken the farmhouse and the money because taking things was easier than giving things, and because Ray had told her it was her right, and because the will said so. But Karen was not stupid. She had worked in real estate for 20 years. She knew that mineral rights existed. She had never thought about them because nobody in the family had ever mentioned them, because Harold had made sure nobody ever would. Now someone at the courthouse had mentioned to someone at the diner that old Dot Purcell had been pulling deed records. And the someone at the diner happened to be a woman whose husband worked with Ray. "I'm looking for what your father left me," Dorothy said. Karen's face changed. Not anger, Something colder. Calculation. The will gave you the barn, Mom, that's it. Everything else goes through probate. Not everything, Dorothy said. Ray called the next morning. He did not call Dorothy. He called Martin Kovac. Kovac called Dorothy afterward and told her what Ray had said, that the family was aware of certain mineral rights holdings that had not been disclosed during probate, that they believed those rights were part of Harold's estate and should have been included in the inventory, and that they intended to file a petition with the Greene County Orphans Court to reopen the probate and add the mineral rights to the estate. Dorothy sat in the barn and listened. Captain lay at her feet. The space heater ticked. "Can they do that?" she asked. "They can file the petition," Kovac said. "Anyone can file anything. The question is whether the court will grant it. And the answer is no, not if the trust was properly executed, properly funded, and properly maintained. Which it was. I made sure of it. Harold made sure of it. For 14 years, then why am I worried? Because filing the petition takes 20 minutes. Defending against it takes months. And they know that. They're not trying to win, Dorothy. They're trying to make it cost you more than you can afford." Ray's strategy was precise. As a used equipment dealer, he had been through enough small claims disputes and lien challenges to understand the economics of legal attrition. He did not need to prove the trust was invalid. He needed to make Dorothy spend money she did not have. $340 in checking. No income, no savings, defending a case that could take 6 months to resolve. He calculated correctly that a 71-year-old woman living in a condemned barn could not afford an attorney for 6 months. He calculated, incorrectly, that Martin Kovac was just a name on a business card. The petition was filed on December 4, 2023, 19 days before Christmas. It named Dorothy A. Purcell as respondent and alleged that Harold R. Purcell had fraudulently concealed estate assets by placing them in a trust designed to circumvent the testamentary wishes expressed in his will, and to deprive his lawful heirs of their rightful inheritance. The filing was signed by Karen, Dale, and Glenn. Dorothy learned later that Dale had signed because Karen told him there might be a lot of money he did not know about. Glenn had signed because Ray emailed him the document and told him it was routine. The court scheduled a hearing for February 2024. Dorothy had 60 days. She had no attorney. Kovac was the trustee, not her personal lawyer, and at 78 he was not taking new cases. She had no money for a retainer. The barn was still condemned. The back taxes were still unpaid. And her children, all 3 of them, the babies she had carried, the children she had fed and driven to school and watched, graduate and held when they cried, had filed a legal document calling their dead father a fraud. She sat in the barn that night longer than she should have. It was 17 degrees. Captain pressed against her leg. She held the sealed manila envelope, the one she still had not opened, and she thought about what it would be like to just let them have it. All of it. The rights, the leases, the trust, the royalties. Let them have it and be done. Move to Uniontown. Live with June. Forget the barn, forget the map, forget the carved post, forget everything Harold had built for her in secret over 20 years. She almost did. What turned her was not the envelope. She did not open it. Not yet. She would open it when she was ready, and she was not ready because she was still afraid of what Harold's voice would do to her. What turned her was a ledger, not the 1997 feed ledger where the map had been hidden. A different one. The 2003 volume. She had pulled it off the shelf in the grain room 3 days after the petition was filed, looking for something. She did not know what. Maybe just looking for Harold's handwriting, the way you look for a person's face in photographs after they are gone. In the 2003 ledger, between entries for alfalfa seed and a vet bill for a lame heifer, Harold had written a note to himself in the margin, "Will sign today. Ed says it covers the surface. The subsurface is in the trust. They can have the house. Dot gets the ground." That note, dated August 14, 2003, the same date as the will, proved that Harold had known exactly what he was doing. The will and the trust were not in conflict. They were 2 halves of the same plan. The will gave the children the surface assets, the house, the equipment, the cash. The trust gave Dorothy the subsurface assets, the mineral rights, the leases, the royalties. Harold had divided his estate deliberately, with legal counsel, and had documented his intent in his own handwriting. Dorothy did what she had done in 1991, when the township assessment was wrong. She went to the county seat. She walked into the Orphans' Court clerk's office. She asked for the forms to file a response to the petition. She filled them out herself, citing the trust instrument, the separate deeds, the lease certificates, and Harold's dated margin note as evidence that the mineral rights had been intentionally excluded from the probate estate. She attached copies of everything: the trust document, the 6 deeds, the 7 lease certificates, the 2003 margin note, photographed in the ledger, with the date and the surrounding feed entries visible. A letter from Martin Kovic, confirming that he had served as trustee since 2009, and that the trust was valid, funded, and irrevocable under Pennsylvania law. She filed the response on December 18. The filing fee was $75. June lent her the money. She had no attorney. She had a cardboard box of documents, 47 years of reading tax assessments, and the quiet certainty of a woman who had never left a thing unfinished. The hearing was held on February 2, 2024, in the Greene County Courthouse. Karen was there with Ray and the Pittsburgh attorney. Dale was there alone. He had driven from Morgantown and looked like he had not slept. Glenn was not there. He had sent a notarized statement, but he had also privately texted Dorothy 2 days earlier. "I'm sorry, Mum. I didn't know what I was signing." The judge reviewed the trust instrument, the deeds, the leases, and the margin note. She asked the Pittsburgh attorney one question: "Did you search the mineral rights index during the original probate?" The attorney said no. The judge denied the petition. She noted in her ruling that the trust was properly established, validly funded, and clearly intended by the grantor to operate independently of his testamentary estate. She noted that the petitioners had failed to present any evidence of fraud, undue influence, or lack of capacity. She noted that the margin note in the 2003 ledger, while not a formal legal document, corroborates the grantor's intent with specificity and contemporaneity. The petition was dismissed with prejudice. The children could not refile. Karen stood up from the table and walked out without speaking. Ray followed her. Dale sat in his chair for a long time. Then he walked to Dorothy, who was standing by the courtroom door holding her cardboard box, and he said, "Dad was right about you." Dorothy said, "Your father was right about a lot of things." She drove home to the barn. She parked the Silverado. Captain was waiting in the cab where she had left him with the heater running. She carried the cardboard box inside, set it on the workbench, and sat down in the folding chair. Then she picked up the sealed manila envelope, the one that said "Dot," and she opened it. The letter was 3 pages, handwritten on lined yellow legal pad paper, dated January 3, 2022, 18 months before Harold died, 6 months before the barn was condemned. Written during the long winter when Dorothy slept in the recliner, and Harold lay in the hospital bed in the back bedroom, with the oxygen concentrator humming. He had written it at night. Dorothy was sure of that. She had been asleep. He had been awake. He was always awake in those last months. The emphysema stealing his sleep before it stole everything else. And he had written to her by the light of the bedside lamp she had bought him at the Goodwill in Waynesburg, the one with the green glass shade. She reads the first line. She reads it again. "Dear Dot, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you found the barn, and you did what I knew you would do. You stayed when everyone else left. You opened what I closed. You followed what I built. That is why I married you. That is why I left you the barn. Not because it was worthless, but because it was everything and you were the only one I trusted to find out why. I started buying the mineral rights in 1994. You were at your mother's funeral, and I drove to Elmer Fyock's place and gave him $1,200 for something nobody thought was worth the paper it was printed on. I did not tell you because I did not know yet what I was building. I just knew the gas companies would come someday, and when they did, whoever held the rights would hold the farm. Not the house, not the tractor, Not the bank account. The farm. The real one. The one under the ground. I put it all in a trust in 2009. Martin helped me. I named it after you because it was always yours. Every royalty check that came in went to the trust. I never spent $1 of it. It is yours, Dot. And it has always been yours. And no one can take it from you because I built it that way on purpose. I am sorry I could not tell you while I was alive. I was afraid, not of you, never of you, but of what would happen if the kids found out before I was gone. I love them, Dot. They are mine. But I know what they are. Karen is afraid of everything, and Ray does her thinking. Dale is drowning and he doesn't know how to ask for help. Glenn hasn't been home in years, and I stopped pretending that doesn't break my heart. They will take the easy things. That is what people do. I could not stop them, and I did not try. But I could make sure that the hard thing, the barn, the one nobody wanted, the one you would have to choose to keep, was the one that held everything I spent 20 years building. You were always the center post, Dot. The one the whole barn leaned on. I knew you would find this. I knew because you are the only person I have ever met who finishes what she starts. All my love, all my years, and all the ground beneath your feet. Harold. Dorothy sat in the folding chair for a long time after she finished reading. Captain lay at her feet. The barn was quiet except for the ticking of the space heater, and the sound of wind against the new silence in her chest. She did not need to read the letter again. She could hear it in Harold's voice. Martin Kovic provided Dorothy with the trust's financial records the week after the hearing. The trust held mineral rights leases, generating royalty income of approximately $18,700 per month, a figure that had been accumulating since the first southwestern energy wells were drilled in 2010. After 13 years of royalties, the trust's account balance, held at a regional bank in Uniontown that Harold had chosen specifically because none of his children banked there, was $2,843,000. $2,843,000, accumulated quietly, $18,700 at a time, deposited into an account Dorothy did not know existed, in a trust named after her, by a man who had never earned more than $62,000 in a single year of farming. The farmhouse the children sold, $285,000. The bank account they divided, $214,000. The tractor Ray listed, $38,500. Total value of everything they took, $537,500. Total value of what they left, $2,843,000 in trust, plus ongoing royalty income of $224,400 per year, plus 310 acres of mineral rights whose market value, if sold outright, Kovac estimated at between $4.2 and $5.1 million. The children had taken the surface. Dorothy held the ground. Karen learned the numbers through her Pittsburgh attorney, who received them as part of the court's post-dismissal record. Dorothy did not tell her. Dorothy did not need to. The numbers told themselves. Ray stopped answering Karen's phone calls for 2 weeks. When he resurfaced, he filed for separation, not from Karen, but from the family's legal entanglements, retaining his own attorney to ensure he was not personally liable for the court costs of the failed petition. Dale drove to the barn 3 weeks after the hearing. He did not call ahead. He parked his truck beside the Silverado and sat in the cab for a long time before he came to the door. "I don't want the money, Mom," he said. "I want to know why Dad didn't trust me." Dorothy looked at her middle child, 46 years old, deep in debt, his hands shaking in a way she recognized because she had seen Harold's hands do the same thing in the years when the farm was failing, and she said, "He did trust you, Dale. He trusted you to take what was easy, and he trusted me to take what was hard. That wasn't a punishment, that was just the truth." Dale sat in the folding chair. Captain walked over and put his head in Dale's lap, and Dale cried in a way Dorothy had not seen him cry since he was 11 years old and his dog had died. Glenn called from North Carolina. He said, "I'm sorry, Mom," and Dorothy said, "I know," and that was the whole conversation. Karen did not call, not that week, not that month, not yet. Dorothy left the door open, but she did not chase. Dorothy did not move out of the barn. Not immediately, she could have. The trust's balance and the monthly income could have bought any house in Greene County, and most houses in Pittsburgh. But she stayed through the rest of February and into March, running the space heater, drinking coffee from the thermos, reading Harold's letter again and again, until she did not need to read it because she could hear it in his voice. She paid the back taxes first, $11,400 to Greene County, sent by certified check, the first check written on the trust account in her own name. She hired a structural engineer from Washington, Pennsylvania, who assessed the barn and told her the east wall could be corrected, the hayloft rebuilt, the roof replaced. The estimate was $114,000. She wrote the check. She did not rush. Harold had not rushed. He had spent 20 years building the trust, one parcel at a time, one lease at a time. One royalty check at a time. Dorothy would restore the barn the same way. One beam at a time. One decision at a time. Captain followed her everywhere. He was 13, slow, his clouded eye milkier now, but he walked the barn as if he owned it. Which, in every way that mattered, he did. He had been Harold's dog before he was Dorothy's, and he moved through the space with the ease of an animal who remembers. When the structural engineer asked Dorothy what the barn was for, she said, "It's the center post." The engineer looked confused. Captain did not. What Dorothy knew now, not in her mind, where she had always known it, but in her body, the way you know something after you have survived the doubt, was this. She had not been left the worthless thing. She had been left the only thing. Harold had stripped away everything that did not matter, the house, the cash, the tractor, and left her the ground itself. Not the surface, which is what people see. The ground beneath, which is what holds everything up. The barn was finished by late summer of 2024. The east wall was straight. The hayloft was rebuilt with engineered lumber and a proper staircase. No more ladder. The roof was standing seam metal, the color of old silver, and when it rained, it sounded like a hymn. The main floor was sealed and leveled, but Dorothy kept the original concrete where the safe had been, a square of lighter stone in the floor, like a hearthstone in a church. She did not build a house. She built something else. The Purcell Agricultural Center opened in October 2024, 1 year and 2 days after Harold's death. It occupied the restored barn and the 4.7 acres of Lot 7B. Dorothy used the royalties to fund it. The center offered 3 things: a tool library for small farmers who could not afford equipment, a bookkeeping clinic run by Dorothy herself, Tuesday and Thursday mornings, 9 to noon, free of charge, and a small plot incubator program for young farmers who needed land to start on. The incubator plots were on the 4.7 acres, divided into half-acre parcels, each leased to a beginning farmer for $1 a year. $1, because Dorothy remembered what it was like to have $340 and a condemned barn, and no one who believed the ground was worth anything. She established the Harold R. Purcell Land Trust to hold the mineral rights in perpetuity. The trust's terms directed that royalty income be used first to fund the agricultural center, second, to pay property taxes on the parcel, and third, to provide grants to Greene County residents for agricultural education. Dorothy was the sole trustee during her lifetime. Upon her death, the trusteeship would pass to a 3-person board selected from the community, not from the family. Dale came to the opening. He brought his daughter, Harold's granddaughter, 15 years old, named Ruth after Dorothy's mother. Ruth asked if she could help with the incubator plots. Dorothy said yes. Glenn sent flowers and a card that said, "Dad would have loved this." Dorothy put the card on the workbench, next to the ammunition box, which she kept there as a reminder. Karen did not come, but 3 months later, in January 2025, Dorothy received a letter. Not a text, not an email, a letter, postmarked Pittsburgh. It was 1 paragraph. It said, "I took the easy things, I know that now. I don't know how to come back from that yet, but I wanted you to know that I know." Dorothy folded the letter and put it in the ammunition box, next to Harold's note. She did not write back. Not yet. Some things take time. Harold had taught her that. On the first anniversary of the center's opening, Dorothy walked through the barn alone. It was early, before the farmers arrived, before the clinic opened, before anyone else was there. Captain was gone by then. He had died in April, peacefully on the barn floor at the base of the center post, and Dorothy had buried him in the southeast corner of Lot 7B, under a stone she had pulled from the creek. The stone had no inscription. Harold would have understood. The barn smelled different now. Sawdust and fresh lumber and coffee, and the faint sweetness of the seed mixes stored in the old grain room. The space heater was gone. A proper furnace had been installed. The folding chair was gone. There were tables and benches. But the workbench was the same, 8 feet of oil-dark oak, the vise still bolted to one end, the pegboard above it still bearing the pencil outlines of tools that were now filled again, because Dorothy had replaced every one that Ray had taken. She walked to the center post. The carved message was still there. She had asked the contractor to preserve it during the renovation, and he had sealed it with a clear coat that made Harold's words gleam like they had just been cut. This was the center post. He told me it was the one the whole barn leaned on. When I met you, I understood what he meant. Dorothy touched the words with her fingertips. She had read them 100 times. She did not need to read them again. She turned and looked at the barn, the straight walls, the new roof, the tables waiting for the day's first farmers, the morning light coming through the windows Harold's father had framed in 1962. She was 72 years old. She had been left a condemned building, a cardboard box of documents, and a dog. She had also been left the only inheritance that mattered. Not the house, not the tractor, not the money. The ground. Dorothy Purcell put her hand flat on the center post, the way Harold must have done 1,000 times, and she stood there for a while, alone in the barn, in the quiet, with the light.